or should we kick this one off? Oh man, a dramatic way to start this episode. And yeah, just something to hear in my ears when I should be in bed still, Barry. I only got 6 hours of sleep last night. My voice is a little bit croaky, so apologies for that. But it's Sunday morning and we are back to record across the pond.
It's good to be here, Chad, and I can see you had a rough weekend, so we're going to get nice and easy into this podcast. We're going to get into some really cool topics, and hopefully by the end of this, you'll be up and ready for the week ahead. But for all of you listening and watching, it's good to have you back. We really enjoyed some GOAT stuff last week, some Trump stuff last week, and we're going to take it very easy today on a nice episode 48 of Across the Pond.
Across the pond with Barry and Chad.
So like I said, Barry, to be honest, I was out last night and the night before, and there's this curfew, this 10 p.m. curfew that is just the bane of everyone living in London at the moment. It honestly, I don't know one person who's happy that it's there. But I mean, obviously, it's got a reason for being. But it does make things really inconvenient when you do want to, I don't know, just have a night out.
Selfishly, I'm a little bit happy that we aren't the only ones suffering with that curfew. It's nice for someone else to feel that pain. I remember when we were at 10 p.m., it was the same thing. Just as you're getting into your evening, just as you're getting into your dinner or your drinks or whatever it is, then everyone's looking at their watches, people start packing up, and you got to head home. It's like such a weird thing. And so I have some sympathy, but at the same time, we went through it, and now we're through it, so I'm a little bit happy as well.
I understand completely, Barry. Just not ideal at all. Anyway, it is what it is, and to be honest, at least we have that privilege, right?
Exactly.
But anyway, let's dig right in to the week that was.
The week that was.
So it's the very first time, I think, Barry, that we've actually stuck to our one topic per segment kind of threshold that we like to set for ourselves so that we don't end up just jumping from one thing off to the next without much real structure, I guess. But one topic, I mean, obviously loads more happened this week. But one thing that we decided we wanted to talk about, right?
Yeah, James Bond, Chad. James Bond, the brand new James Bond film that has now been pushed to next year, which is quite sad, I think. I think we all wanted a bit of James Bond in our life. It's been a while since we've seen 007 in the wild. And the brand new film, I think it's called No Time to Die, has been postponed to next year. Yep. And it brings up that same discussion we've had a couple times, Chad, about what do cinemas do in today's world where lockdown restrictions are still in place around the world, and it's hard to get people into those cinemas to go and see these films.
Yep.
Do they go straight to Netflix? Do they go straight to online streaming? Do they cancel it completely? Do they postpone it? Lots and lots of drama and all of those different options. And obviously the James Bond franchise is a huge deal. So for them to push to next year is going to set a precedent for some other films, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has just been, I don't know, it's just been a terrible experience, I suppose, for any of those Bond fans who have had their hopes up for this release. There's a date, it's coming out. If you're living in London, there's posters everywhere. We had Billie Eilish and Phineas come out, actually, to promo this movie. And then it gets pushed back to late in the year. And then we get late in the year and it's get pushed back again to April 2021. It really has been just a roller coaster and just not pleasant for anyone. I mean, we have seen some movies be released in this period. All of my friends are talking about Tenet, which I need to go and see, the latest Christopher Nolan. And yeah, I mean, it's just one of those. It's really not pleasant.
Yeah, definitely not. And I think that for a long time, James Bond has been very on point. Like every single scheduled release, they managed to do it. They're one of those few franchises that are still going after tons and tons of reboots, right? They're one of those like evergreen franchises you never think there's going to go away.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the pandemic has had its way and is going to push it even further. And hopefully 2021 is the last of it, Chad.
Exactly. Well, some sad news coming out of that release. And I suppose it's not directly related to James Bond, but it certainly doesn't help. And that is the cinema chain in the UK called Cineworld. So we do have a few major chains here. We've got Odeon, we've got View, we've got Cineworld. And Cineworld are now closing, as far as I understand, pretty much all of their cinemas, kind of around the UK, US as well, because they were kind of counting on this release to get some foot traffic in the door. And I guess it's a question of working capital when it comes to these big corporations who are paying massive amounts of rent because cinemas are massive, and ultimately there's no foot traffic coming through the door.
Yeah, those fixed costs just kind of eat away at you if you aren't getting that revenue through the door, right? And like you say, not just the size, but the locations of these chains. They're obviously in high foot traffic areas and big shopping malls and that sort of thing. And so it's really important that you have lots of people going through there. And if you aren't able to kind of manage that revenue, it actually makes more sense to kind of just shut down completely and just try and hibernate as long as you can to stay alive. But like we chatted about in the past, I think a lot of cinema chains are really going to struggle through this period. I really wonder what cinema chains of next year and the future are going to look like, because we've almost set a precedent now that we're more than happy to sit at home and open up Netflix
Yeah.
and watch TV and watch a movie by ourselves, right?
Definitely.
So that pull to the cinema is not quite the same as it used to be. When, in the old days, and I say the old days in tongue-in-cheek a little bit, but you'd have to go to the cinema to see that big blockbuster release, right? For the new James Bond film, if you wanted to see it, you had to go to cinema and go and watch it. And there was a whole experience built around that. And slowly over time, we've been moving more and more towards online streaming and towards kind of sitting at home with your popcorn and your big TV screen and enjoying the movie that way. And so I don't know how cinemas are going to recover from this kind of thing. Beyond just the IMAX stuff, which obviously you can go to cinema to go and see great surround sound and amazing IMAX movies and whatnot. For anything that's not IMAX, I don't know where the pull is going to be, Chad.
Yeah, it is interesting. And I've had cinemas open in London. They have been open. Obviously, a lot of them have been playing some of the older releases, kind of re-releasing stuff. And I mean, one particular example that is really, I suppose, apt to talk about now is the release of David Attenborough's A Life on Our Planet, which I believe
Yes.
is also on Netflix, I think, or one of the streaming platforms.
is.
But it's out in
Yeah.
cinemas. And for me, I've got this now, I suppose, decision. I'm a little bit torn. Do I actually go into cinema to watch it and wear a mask the whole way through? Or do I ease up onto the comfort of my couch and play my music as loud as I want and get gripped, I suppose, in that kind of fashion? It's a tough decision.
It really is. And I'm not sure what it's like in the UK, Chad, but in South Africa, the movies have got more and more expensive every single year.
For sure.
And so by the time you've bought the movie ticket, the popcorn, the slushy, all of that stuff, you're actually in for quite a big investment compared to sitting on the couch and using your Netflix subscription.
Yep.
And so like you say, it really is a big choice. And I think for some movie fanatics, they'll kind of cringe at this idea because they say like, no, the way movies are supposed to be enjoyed is in a big screen
Yep.
with lots of people around you and enjoying that group experience. But for someone like me, I don't think that way. I think that like the comfort and the freedom and the lower of cost of being able to sit at home and enjoying it with some friends and family, that's quite powerful.
Yeah.
And so for me, I'm a little bit skeptical as to what's going to happen to cinemas going forward. They're going to have to innovate in some way. Some innovations we've chatted about in the past on this podcast is talking about subscription services maybe.
Sure.
To pay like a monthly fee and get access to a certain number of movies in that month. They've got to find new ways of getting customers in that door. And if they don't, they're going to find themselves being less and less relevant over time. And the more big movies go straight to streaming and skip cinemas altogether, the more in trouble they're going to be.
Absolutely. Well, let's actually talk about the prices, Barry. Let's just get into that because I find it quite interesting having been in South Africa and, moved over about 2.5 years ago. And you're completely right. The trajectory of movie prices has just been insane over the last couple of years. But I think you will be taken quite aback when you hear about the prices here in London to go and watch a movie. So to go and watch a movie from the, I don't know, experiential kind of research that I've done, please don't quote me on this, but you would normally pay about £13 a ticket. So that's 260 Rand or more.
Wow.
On just a standard seat. We're not talking about those wonderful lazy boy relaxing recliner chairs that you have there in South Africa. We've got those as well. But that's just for a stock standard movie ticket.
Wow, I had no idea, Chad. That is way crazier than I anticipated. Yeah, that's like more than double what we have here.
Okay.
That is nuts. And the popcorn and drinks and stuff, are they also overpriced?
Yeah, way overpriced. It's actually insane. You normally pay, I think, last time I remember, is about £10 for your popcorn and slushy or whatever else it is that you're having, which is a lot of money, like you say, for one outing. And ultimately you can get a similar type experience back at home. The one thing that I must be honest, and the one thing I have missed about South African cinemas is your popcorn experience. So out here in the UK, you get your popcorn. Ultimately, there's two flavors. It's either sweet or salty, or mixed. You can mix the two if you'd like. Whereas in South Africa, depending on whether you're going to New Metro or Ster-Kinekor, you can either get a sachet of a wide variety of flavors. I even remember seeing chocolate, cheese, onion and chives, and all salt and vinegar, all of this stuff. Or you can actually, probably not in COVID time, you can probably actually just pick up your shaker and go crazy with as much as you'd like. I really miss that, Barry.
It's such a great part of it, and I didn't realize that we were unique in that because it's
Yeah.
one of the best parts about South African movies, right? And it's been the cause of lots and lots of debates as to what is the perfect combination of spice for your popcorn. I can't tell you the number of times you're chatting with your friends and they'll be like ardent butter supporters or cream and chives or chocolate or whatever it is, and everyone thinks they know the perfect combination.
Yeah.
And even when they start injecting Smarties, Chad,
Ooh,
or
yeah.
Astros,
Yep.
or some other crunchy pieces in there, there's a whole range of concoctions you can come up with. And it really is a great part of the movie experience.
I do really miss it. I honestly do. And if I can somehow get those spices here in London, I'm going to do it. I'm going to actually look into it now because you make me feel like my perfect combination, Barry, which is, like you say, a little bit of butter, a little bit of cheese and chives. I never went too heavy on the cheese by itself, the kind of orange, very orange spice. I was much more a fan of cheese and chives. But yeah, that's my vibe. What about you?
Chad, I must be honest, I'm much more of a classic vintage type person.
Oh,
right?
no.
Salt and vinegar, a little bit of butter, and we're good to go. I don't go crazy because the popcorn needs to speak for itself. You don't just want to be eating like spice and popcorn, you want popcorn and spice.
Fair enough. I mean, have you seen some of these gourmet popcorn places that have opened? You've got these incredibly expensive varieties of popcorn. I just can't believe it.
There's a pop-up shop in the middle of Sandton City at the moment, and I can't remember what their name is, but they sell this kind of popcorn, and it's like all gold. It looks like it's golden plated. It's like very, very fancy containers and fancy. And you look at the prices, Chad, and you're like, holy moly!
It's just popcorn.
Who would pay for this? Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely nuts.
What is going to be next? It's just crazy. Let's then move on, Barry, to our next segment.
Stuff I found interesting.
Alrighty, stuff I found interesting. Now, Barry, you've chucked a few things at this list and I'm keen to dig into them. The first one is something that you mentioned actually at the bottom of one of your newsletters, and I found it quite an interesting hook. So I'm keen to hear your description of it.
Definitely. I think it's really interesting, and it kind of talks to the Bill Gates conversation we've had in the past, talking about philanthropy and talking about if you're one of these wealthy, ultra-rich people and you want your money to do as much good as possible, there's various strategies you can go with, right? So you can choose to start your own foundation and do lots of in-person work and really be hands-on with the way your money gets given away. You can choose to just give it away to effective causes in big donations, either when you die or during your life. Or you can wait until your children or your foundation inherits it once you finally leave this earth.
Yep.
And so there's lots of different strategies talking about how best to use this money. And this is an example that I found by a guy called Chuck Feeney, who I didn't know the name of, but he is the founder of Duty Free. So for
Okay.
anyone who's ever done any international travel, and you know those huge duty-free stores where you buy your whiskey and your cigars and your cigarettes and your Toblerone and all that good stuff, he is the person who came up with that whole concept and kind of put them in airports all around the world. And so I found that strange because in my mind it felt like it was an airport-run
100%.
thing, but it's clearly not. It's actually like a company that's been built, and Chuck Feeney is the guy who did it. So he's this ginormous billionaire. He's now, I think, 89 years old. And what's been really special about him is that about 20 or 30 years ago, him and Warren Buffett, they're good friends. And as ultra-rich, they have to be friends. It's just how it works, right? And so he had a chat with Warren Buffett, and they decided together they were going to take this pledge called the Giving Pledge. And basically what the Giving Pledge was is trying to give away 95+% of your wealth over your lifetime, with the idea that that money can do really, really good for the world and can really push various causes forward. And so Chuck did this. And what he's actually done, Chad, which is really, really cool to see, is that it's not just lip service. There was an article last week that came out that said he's finally gone bankrupt.
Oh my gosh.
The billionaire has finally gone bankrupt from giving away all of his money. So he's kind of lived up to this 89-year-old person. He's now given away over $8 billion to charitable causes around the world. And he's now out of money. And I think that's such a special story because a lot of it, sometimes you're a bit skeptical. Like, I'm going to give I'll give the money away later. Don't worry. Just trust me. It's hard to know, like, are they actually going to follow through with it? Because it's very easy to talk about this stuff. It's much more difficult to actually take out the checkbook and give it away. And he's one of those guys who's really kind of lived up to his promise and given away $8 billion to the point that now him and his wife are living off basically nothing.
Oh my gosh, it's such a crazy story. And I suppose if you are ever in that fortunate position to have that kind of problem, Barry, of deciding how you're going to give it away, which I hope we will be in one day, I don't think I'm going to adopt that approach. I think personally the approach of kind of 10% while you're still living is a good one. And then, if you do want to donate anything in your will, I think that's the sensible thing to do because his quality of life now for the rest of how long his life is going to be compromised. Although I'm not sure, is he still involved in this business? Does he still have some dividends coming? Is it still kind of some sort of tap that is flowing some resources his way, or did he really have that one pot that he's now exhausted?
So I'm not actually sure what his lifestyle looks like right now. I'm sure he's not in poverty. I'm sure he's doing just fine. I don't think he's like gone bankrupt to the
Okay.
point of absolutely nothing. But I think in one of the interviews that I read about him, he was saying that he wanted to see the good that his money would do.
Yeah.
He wanted to live long enough to be able to see what he could do with his money. And I get that. Like when it comes to fulfillment, when it comes to like that closing that circle in your life,
Yeah.
you want to be able to see what all that hard work and all that success was able to do for the world.
Yeah.
And so I get it. There's obviously the debate about compound interest, right? So when you're giving it away throughout your life, there's an argument to be made that maybe you should continue to invest it and continue to build and build and build and give it away right at the end. So I understand that argument.
Yeah.
But psychologically, that joy of being able to see what your money actually does in the world, that must be indescribable.
Absolutely, and that makes complete sense why you would choose that approach. I just hope, because obviously as our life expectancies are growing longer and longer by the year, hopefully he does have just enough to keep himself going at a kind of reasonable level, because that would be quite sad if we're honest with ourselves. But yeah, amazing thing that he's done by donating so much money. That's just staggering amounts.
I'm sure you could call up Warren and ask for some pocket money if he needed. I'm sure that's not a problem.
That's true. Yeah, absolutely. Good to be in those kinds of circles, hey? So let's move on then to the next one, Barry. Talk us through it.
Yeah, so this one is a little bit difficult to describe because it's a video you actually need to go and watch.
Okay.
So we'll leave the link in the description and all that. But basically what this is that someone went and found a very, very old, grainy, black and white video from 1896.
Okay.
And it's this little video of a snowball fight in Lyon in France, right? So just a random video on the side of the road, people throwing snowballs at each other. And it's in this like very, very early camera technology. And so what these guys have done is they've taken this video and they've used the latest in AI, the latest in camera technology, the latest in editing technology to actually make it colorized and bring it into the 21st century. So they've turned this ancient video into something that's very watchable in 2020. So by watching it, it's really an amazing kind of time capsule of what life used to be like in 1896. And so you're able to look back in time and look at like what a snowball fight looks like in France. It's such a fascinating idea.
That is such a cool idea, especially when we spoke, a few weeks ago about the iPad release, when you can zoom in and add extra frames and add extra detail and do all of that kind of stuff.
Enhance.
To do that in video is staggering, and then go another level and add color as well. And I guess remove the grain, all of that kind of stuff. Really is insane. And if you take it a step further, when we actually get this kind of scale with this AI technology that I think we'll get to eventually, the question of investing in high quality camera equipment at source, it's going to be an interesting one to kind of watch how the debate unfolds, because I'm pretty sure when we get to that kind of large scale, you might be able to have a membership to some sort of AI kind of service or software that will be able to upscale your footage for a relatively low cost. And so you might be able to take your iPhone footage to a much higher level.
Yeah, it's such a good point, and it's a debate that's going to rage on for years and years between the camera purists who believe everything should be done in camera versus those in the post-production who can do all sorts of magic and make it look like nothing like what it looked like in camera. And so it's a great example of like what technology can do just because it's pixels, right? At the end of the day, any video is just a piece of information. It's just zeros and ones and information, and you can do lots and lots of cool stuff with it if you know what you're doing. And so what these guys were able to do by inserting extra frames and removing grain and adding color and making it smoother and all this stuff makes this video that shouldn't actually exist, right? It was way before this fancy video technology. And so it's really cool to see what potential there is. And like you say, it's the right thing to think about what comes next from this. And you're not going to need the greatest camera in the world going forward. Like a lot of the innovation, a lot of the progress in photography and in videography is in computational stuff, right? In like what can you do with the software piece of it? The camera is just going to be an input device to get that information into some sort of source, and then all the computation and all the processing on top of that is going to make that footage whatever you want it to be. And so that's where the innovation is going to come from in the future. And that's why I think we're going to start seeing, instead of smartphones adding a new camera every single year, they're going to start thinking about what does the software need to do and how does that post-production actually going to impact what we see at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And that post-production and this kind of debate is a key one to kind of topics that I want to talk about on the back of this, Barry. The first one is Sony smartphones. Now, I don't know if you've been following what's happening in the Sony world, but they released their Sony Xperia 5 II a little while back. I don't know how long ago, a couple of weeks ago, let's say. And basically these devices, which nobody's been talking about at all, funny enough, essentially we've got Sony, who's a manufacturer of incredibly high-end cameras. We spoke about their cameras the other day. And they're basically rolling out some of this tech into their smartphones. Now, obviously, they're limited by the sensor. It's got a 12 megapixel camera, and they've got 3 cameras, I think. The usual combination of telephoto, wide angle, etc. But what this camera essentially lets you do is dial into full automatic mode in camera, and even the UI, everything like that, it feels like you basically have one of the Sony cameras on your phone. They've been able to strap a 4K screen onto this device. And essentially the question of why no one is talking about these cameras. I had a Sony phone a while ago, the Sony Satio, which was one of my favorite phones ever. I loved it. And it also had a camera that was amazing. You could actually kind of slide off to open the lens, and you had a dedicated camera button. I just have such fond memories of it. But you're completely right. I suppose this is the way that we're going, where you're able to dial in a bit more on the software, and you take advantage of the kind of AI autofocus features, and be able to do a heck of a lot more on the phone. And it really, really is sparking this kind of debate.
That's fascinating, and yeah, I haven't been following this conversation, and maybe that's a sign that's why no one's talking about it, right? For some reason, it hasn't kind of caught the cultural zeitgeist. Do you think it's because of the phone itself, Chad? Like, is the phone a really good phone? Like, putting the camera aside for a second.
I mean, I think it is a very good Android phone, right? I think if you're on the Android system, it's comparable to the likes of Samsung and LG, whatever else is kind of the play of the month in the Android world. I know that changes. Even the Google Pixels. I think they've also released their latest one not too long ago. So yes, I think it's pretty much a really good Android phone. It's got some other nifty little features like that fingerprint recognition on the on button. It drops the notch. Like I said, it's got a 4K screen, which has a high refresh rate as well. So it's got really, really good specs and some cool features, and I don't know why it hasn't caught that cultural wave. I think everyone is gung-ho Apple at the moment, myself and you included as well, and all of the integrations, I guess, too, which is kind of making Android a harder sell, but, Android certainly has its place. And I'm not completely sure myself, not being an Android user, why that is.
Yeah, it is strange. I think that Sony have a really good brand, right? They're really, really well regarded, and they've made some really, really cool stuff. So it is a bit strange. Maybe the marketing plan wasn't quite on point. Maybe they were caught up in the Trump news cycle or something. There's always a bunch of reasons for these things. But at the end of the day, I think that with products like this, the good will rise to the top, right? With enough time, if these things are as good as some people say they are, then they should rise to the top. Hopefully that's the idea. That's how this should work, right? Is that the best products should rise.
True.
And we'll have to watch the space and see what happens from here.
Absolutely.
One more thing I wanted to chat about, Chad, was the idea, what this means for history. So if you think about it, when you're back in school and you're doing history, you're studying from these old grainy photographs, you're looking at these some terrible videos. I don't know if you ever did, like, where you put the big TV screen in the middle of the class, and we all watch this like World War II documentary. They're all in like very, very grainy and difficult to really buy into it at the end of the day. If they're able to do this sort of thing and make this footage more tangible and more colorized and more engaging for people, the idea is that hopefully more people will be interested in history, because all of a sudden you can open up all of this footage to a world that is very used to 4K on their Netflix account kind of thing. And so I think that's quite exciting if that's what they're able to do, because history for a long time has very much been through the eyes of whoever's telling it to you. So it's very much through text, it's very much through historians talking about how things have happened. If you're able to take some of this footage, and not all of it, but some of it, and turn it into real 21st century quality footage, I wonder what it might do for us learning about what happened in our past.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good point. And I am guilty of that. I'm so not keen to kind of dig into the old school style of history. And if you could modernize it somehow, you'd definitely get my buy-in. One good example of that is the Crown series, which, Barry, by the way, there's a new season coming mid-November, and I am frothing at the release. I I cannot wait.
Yes.
We're basically now going into the era of Princess Diana, and so far the little snippets that I've seen look really, really good. So if that's an example, then that certainly is a good way to do it, because I have been just fascinated at the stories of the royal family, and I guess all of the various experiences that they've been through, and all of the kind of scandals that have been out, or possibly have been out, suggestions, all those kinds of things. And if somebody had kind of strapped on a historian type composition and was sitting down just telling me, well, if back in the day this is what happened, and there was a suggestion that this happened, I wouldn't have been so keen on it. But strap. You're right. That's exactly it. That's me. That's me watching that kind of thing. But strap it into the cinematic Netflix production that is The Crown, and you've got my buy-in 100%.
Definitely. And so I think there's some exciting potential for this sort of thing if we're able to bring some of that technology and some of that history back to life in a way. I know there's one thing I want to shout out is that there's an amazing series on Netflix. I think it's called World War II in color.
Okay.
And they've done a similar thing. So they've taken, obviously the footage from World War II is much better than, say, this 1896 footage. Yep. But what they've been able to do is they've added color, they've remastered it, and they've added a soundtrack of popular music to it. And it's made it really, really engaging. So it's a crazy long series of documentaries. It's like 7 episodes of like 2 hours each, something crazy. But it's an example of what is possible when you take some of these new 21st century ideas and ways of production and apply it to history in a very engaging way. And hopefully for our kids and for our generation going forward, they'll look back on history and it'll be way more engaging than what we went through, Chad.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely hope so. Because you do want to kind of learn a few of these things, but you just do need to get that interest, I suppose. You need that curiosity to let anything actually stick. And to be able to watch it in good quality definitely helps with that. Final thread to wrap this topic up on my side, Barry, where we talk about this post-production versus shot-in-camera style of stuff. I saw a tweet by a guy we spoke about a few weeks ago, Casey Neistat, arguably the godfather of YouTube. And I found out last night I was with someone who didn't know who he was, and it was quite a funny discussion point. So if you don't know anything about him, do go and check him out. Ultimately, just to see why he's got that title, and it's definitely a deserving one. But he put out a tweet, Barry, essentially talking about some advice that he gave a young filmmaker. And I'm just going to read his message, which is: general ideology, I don't like filters, color correction, transitions, digital effects, fancy font treatments, or titles. I think they're cheap and easy. Anyone can download and plug in. They're not a demonstration of creativity, but something pre-packaged and emblematic of a more formal, mainstream-like aesthetic that a lot of younger creators see as aspirational. Aspirational because using easy plugins makes their homemade videos look like what is seen on TV. Use nothing but straight cuts and footage out of the camera. Text is almost always Helvetica, not because I like the look, but just because it's default. Expressing creativity using the most basic, accessible methods is the hardest thing to do and the purest. The very best steakhouses serve their fillets on a plate with nothing else. Shitty franchises cover theirs in sauce and other shit to distract you from the fact that you're eating dog food. And I thought it was quite a funny tweet, Barry, obviously highly controversial. Just this debate that is really such an important one versus post-production or in camera.
It's so important though, Chad, because so many of us get caught up in that trap of worrying about the tools and the equipment all day long.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, like we chatted about before, storytelling, it must come first. It has to come first. And obviously there's space for really good production. Obviously we want our stuff to sound as crisp as possible. We want it to look as good as possible. And we're going to put effort into post-production for those reasons. But if you do that instead of a good story, you're never going to make a bad story work, right? Whereas if you have a good story and it's shot on a flip phone, it'll still be great.
Exactly.
And so it's one of those things we have to keep reminding ourselves of, because it's so easy to get caught up in those things. We'll go and buy someone else's presets, right? We'll spend money on a unique look that just might make our stuff look exactly like theirs without actually worrying about the story. And that's the mistake. So you have to have both. You really have to have both. And so often the story is what we throw away because it's harder to do. It's much easier to get the tech right.
Absolutely. And I'm completely guilty of that. And it's something that I've been trying to focus on lately, to just try and focus on the story and try and actually make it more engaging, make the content, make it more engaging ultimately. because you're right. It could look good, but ultimately, without any kind of backbone to the footage or to the story, ultimately, you're just watching good-looking stuff. So yeah, completely right, and I think it's something that we all need to remember when we kind of go back on our creations. All right, so let's wrap that up, Barry. Let's move on then to the next thing that I found quite interesting this week. There we are. I must be honest. I haven't watched all of the movies, and I know Barry. Yeah,
Chad.
I know.
Chad. Dear listeners, I apologize for Chad's lack of culture. We will right this ship. I promise you. Please stick with us. We will rebuild. Across the pond, we will rebuild.
We've had a few of these moments. Firstly with Star Wars, secondly with Lord of the Rings, now with Harry Potter. That's what we're talking about, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, I've watched a majority of the series, but not all. Yes, we will right the ship. We will get there eventually.
Do you realize you're talking to a huge Harry Potter fan? Like a fan that went to Harry Potter World when he was in London and had the time of his life? Do you realize that?
Really? Okay, amazing. I haven't been myself yet, and I actually went past the Harry Potter theatre yesterday because there's a theatre production which is incredibly
Yes.
popular. It's 2 acts. People wait years to get in there, and I was thinking, what about all those people who had bought tickets, who were waiting, and you've just got this franchise that the doors are just closed. It's such a sad thing to watch. But I'm sure you would have loved to go to that too.
Chad, I went to it actually. I went to in San Francisco. I went to the San Francisco version
Okay.
with my good friend Danny. So I saw both parts. I was thoroughly engrossed for
Nice.
2 whole days, 2 whole evenings. I had the time of my life. I was like a little kid again. It was great.
Amazing. Okay, really cool. Okay, so Barry, the thing that I came across this past week that I found quite interesting was when you actually look at the franchise and you actually look at some of the characters and ultimately ask yourself the question of Draco Malfoy, the antagonist of the series. Essentially, when you look at him, right, and people have so many strong feelings towards this guy. Yeah, Slytherin represents all things evil, at least from what I've seen. Barry, when you ask yourself how much screen time he's actually had throughout the whole series, what kind of number would you instinctively give?
Oh, so if we're thinking about, there were 8 movies, right? And each movie was probably at least 2 hours, I'd say. So let's say 16 hours or so of total time. Draco Malfoy is one of the biggest characters, I would say. So on screen time, I'd say a couple hours at least, maybe 4 or 5 of the 16.
That's interesting, and I like the educated guess there, Barry. I'm going to completely whip you down, and I'm going to say his screen time was actually 31 minutes and 30 seconds.
No, man. For the whole franchise.
For the whole franchise. So I found that absolutely fascinating, and I guess it's just important about how you can build up a character, how J.K. Rowling can build up a character and build perspectives to that character, and really make it a featuring character in the whole series. But in terms of actual screen time, 31 minutes. They've obviously done a heck of a lot of message telling in that time.
Yeah, definitely. That's really interesting because I think what makes J.K. Rowling so incredible in my mind is the amount of depth and nuance she gets into each of her characters. And Draco Malfoy is a great example. It's this like very easy antagonist, like this kind of enemy of Harry Potter throughout the series. But as you go on, you get to learn more and more that he's in these shoes he doesn't want to be in.
Okay.
And the reason that he's become this person is because of his family background, because of his connection with Voldemort and all that good stuff. And so there's so much depth in his character. He's one of my favorites of all the characters in the whole series. So to hear there's only 31 minutes of screen time is crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you manage to get that much character development out of so little screen time? And I would guess that a lot of it comes through the discussions of Harry, Ron, and Hermione about Draco, right? So I'm imagining a lot of it comes from that. Yeah. And it's kind of, it does make a little bit of sense to me, because if you look at anyone who writes in the horror genre or in kind of the hero versus villain genre, they will talk about the fact that the less you show the villain, the more scary he gets. Or the less like you show about him, the more kind of mysterious and worried you are about this villain. And so maybe that's part of it. Maybe that like we're trying to cast Draco as this evil character, and so we're gonna give you as little as possible. But over time, I certainly feel like, definitely in the books, and I'm assuming in the movies as well, you start to realize that he's not as evil as you thought he was, and that over time you get a sense that his parents are the ones who've kind of like put this on him,
Yeah.
and he's carrying this huge thing on his shoulder. And so that is really interesting that it only has 31 minutes. Imagine living that life. Sorry, Chad, I'm getting very excited.
That's fine.
Imagine living that life of recording those movies for like years and years and years and years. Like, how many days was he just sitting in a caravan waiting for his time on set? I mean, crazy.
Yeah, I'm sure he's getting paid swimmingly for doing that. So
Oh, yeah.
I bet you he has no complaints on that. But yeah, I mean, what is happening with any of the Harry Potter stars? I mean, I haven't really seen much of Hagrid following the release, or any of the other kind of, like Draco. What is he doing these days?
Yeah, so I think his name is Tom Felton. I think his real name is Tom Felton. And he's actually been in a couple other series and movies since then. Obviously, never is going to be as successful as Harry Potter. It's a really, really tough thing for your first thing to be the most successful movie franchise of all time, right? It's really, really tough. And I think that for all of those guys who grew up, I mean, when they started, they were like kids, Chad. They were 10, 11 years old when they started the first one. And so it's very hard to break out of those molds and become something bigger. Daniel Radcliffe has had some time on Broadway. He was in a show called Icarus for a long time.
Okay.
He's had a couple other movies he's been involved in. So I think he's slowly starting to try and break that mold. But it's very hard to see him as anyone else than Harry Potter. It's very, very hard.
Yep.
Emma Watson, same thing, right? Obviously has Hermione, a very, very iconic character. She's kind of broken out, and she still does some film stuff. She was in The Beauty and the Beast, of course, and a lot of like those kind of films. But a lot of her work nowadays is more on gender equality and more activist type stuff. But if you talk about the secondary characters, the kind of guys that the smaller characters like Draco might be considered, it's very hard to see where they go from where they are. Even with 31 minutes of screen time, when you think of Draco Malfoy, you see his face, and that's just how it is.
Exactly.
And so it's hard to now go and play a cop in a comedy series. It just doesn't happen, you know.
That's so true, actually, and it's a pity, really, because it does kind of, I suppose, limit the future of someone's career. But I bet he's set himself up by doing that franchise in such a good way that, you know, it's not going to be much of a problem. Barry, obviously, while the series was being released, we were kind of similar ages to the actors, and I have to ask you, when the first Harry Potter came out, did you have that Emma Watson crush that all of the other boys around did?
Chad, I still have a crush on Emma Watson today. That series of books and that series of movies was one of the most defining things of my childhood, right?
Okay.
And every single time a book came out, I was one of those idiots who was standing outside Exclusive Books at midnight to get my copy the moment it came out. I remember when I was a kid, Chad, I used to get in trouble because I would go to bed, tell my mother I was going to bed, and lie under the covers with a torch reading my Harry Potter.
Wow.
And I used to get in real trouble because I was supposed to be asleep. And so that's how much those books affected me. And Emma Watson, of course, when the movie started, that was the childhood crush we all grew up with. And she's just gotten more and more attractive every single year, Chad. And so I still have that crush. I still think she's amazing. And it's I think she's cool.
Well, next time you're in London, do stop in and make sure you get your photo with her, Barry, at the Wax Museum, Madame Tussauds.
Ooh.
It
There's an
was the
idea.
very first thing that I did when I got here. Because, you know, if you can, why not? Alrighty, well, some other things that are happening in London, Barry, I wanted to quickly touch on, and the reason why I only had 6 hours of sleep last night is the London Cocktail Week, something I've never done before. But I was quite interested this time because obviously we've all been inside of our homes, and now to have any little excuse to go and explore new places is great, is honestly great to have. And Cocktail Week has become Cocktail Month. So essentially what the whole model is here is you buy a wristband that lets you access essentially fixed price cocktails at a suite of venues in and around London. And they are tons, honestly tons. Every single venue has their own exclusive cocktail that they are making, one or two, which you'll be able to find. And ultimately the cocktail prices are £6 at each of these venues, which is very reasonable for London prices. It costs £15 for the bangle. And I've just really been enjoying this excuse to go and explore your city a little bit more. Obviously, this 10 p.m. curfew does not help at all. But I really, really thought it was interesting that they've kind of changed their model a little bit and extended this to a month-long thing, just to try and get some more appetite going.
I think it's such a cool idea, and it's a great example, like you say, of discovering parts of your city you never would have gone to before. So I'm sure there's bars and cocktail lounges that you found that you never would have walked into normally,
Definitely.
but because they've got this special, you're like, let's give it a go. And I've seen some of the photos on Instagram, and it looks like you're going to lots and lots of different places and getting a sense of what else is out there,
Yep.
and open up new venues that have this kind of undiscovered feeling to them, and that's what makes these kind of initiatives so great. Have
Exactly.
you found that you found some bars that are really, really cool that you never would have walked into previously?
Absolutely, and some that are just down the road because there's so many places in London. You could honestly live here for 50 years trying to get through every single place because there's just so many places here. And you're completely right. I've discovered some new spots just even down the road from me. The thing that I've found really
Awesome.
interesting, and I don't know if it's just because of the fact that I suppose, a lot of people are weary at spending money and a lot of people still staying home a lot of the time. But I've found the kind of general friendliness of the staff working at these restaurants has been turned 180 degrees. Typically in London, go in and it's not a really friendly place, right? It's different to South Africa in terms of just that small talk in a restaurant setting.
Yeah.
And my experience for this cocktail week certainly is every single place we've been to has been incredibly welcoming, hospitable, friendly. Small talk in London, I'm shocked, and so I hope that it's a bigger discussion of a cultural change, really, where people start to be grateful for foot traffic and not just becoming accustomed to it because there's so many people in the city.
Yeah, again, it's that scarcity that's driven this mindset, I would
Yep.
assume, right? The idea that usually we can just get away with anyone coming in because there's so many people going all the time. But the moment you have this kind of situation where all of a sudden foot traffic is way down and you got these people coming into your bar for the very first time, you desperately want to convert them into regular customers,
Exactly.
right? And so they want to make the best first impression they can to keep you, Chad, going back to that same bar again and again and again over the next few years. And so again, it's a great example of how supply and demand can really change the way an interaction works and the way a transaction works. The moment there's lots and lots of people going in, they don't have to be friendly because they can get away with it, right? They can get away with just serving you what they need to do,
Exactly.
turning the tables as quickly as they can and making their money that way. The moment the demand drops and all of a sudden there isn't that kind of booming kind of consumer landscape, all of a sudden you have to start competing in other ways, and that's beyond your food and drink. It goes to your service, your friendliness, etc.
Exactly.
So it's a good reminder for all of us as to how the market works, but also if you're a restaurateur, if you're a business owner, even if you're just a human being, the more effort you put into being friendly and entertaining and kind of welcoming in all of these spaces, you're going to win in the long term. Even though it takes energy, sometimes you don't feel like doing it, you've had a bad day, you don't want to put that effort in, it really does make a big difference. And to the fact that you, Chad, I'm guessing, will be much more likely to go back to places where you really felt welcomed versus a place that just served you your drink and left you to be.
100%. And it's a key part of this experience that we've just been missing since being in London. And I hope it's here to stay. I really do. Because it just makes the experience more pleasurable. And like you say, if you're a human being, we should want these things. I don't know why when ultimately we don't have to work for something anymore, we kind of lose that just general nicety. And I think it's really, really important. So Barry, shall we move on to our next segment?
Let's do it.
Looking ahead.
All right, so one thing to discuss here, Barry, obviously keeping a nice beady eye there on the time. We're doing pretty good, so let's check it out. One thing to discuss. Mmhmm. That is the name of a startup company.
It kind of feels like an autocorrect, Chad.
It does, yeah. And the philosophy of the founder is, well, you should be able to say the name while eating. And I mean, it's such a random way of deciding on your company's name. But I really want to chat about it this week here because we've spoken about how video conferencing platforms have been evolving. Obviously, as we've switched to working from home and doing a lot more remote communication. And is not a replacement on essentially the tools that we're using at the moment, like Skype, Zoom, Teams, etc., etc. What it is it's an add-on, Barry, to ultimately give you a whole lot more in the way of functionality, presentability, and ultimately make your calls a lot more seamless and professional. So I thought it was something we had to discuss today, and I just wanted to ask if you've watched the demo by any chance?
I haven't, Chad, but I have read one or two articles about them. So
Okay.
consider me a little bit in the loop, but not much.
Alrighty. Well, basically, we've seen obviously all of these apps rolling out this virtual background, right? So no matter how much of a mess your apartment is in, you can rock into your video call and slap on a virtual background and look really good and presentable. This takes it to another level. So essentially, it makes your virtual background interactive. So firstly, you can have a virtual video background, which looks really cool. Ultimately, you can add a presentation screen up right next to you. So if you think about your weatherman who's presenting something behind you and there's a presentation actually reflected on that background, this is kind of what this tool is going to be able to let you do. On top of that, it lets you do a whole bunch of other cool things. So you can make yourself bigger or smaller to ultimately make that presentation stand out more or less. You can actually move your head around. So if you're pointing at something, you can move your head around and make sure that it lines up to your presentation. So there's all of those really cool little tools. You can actually dim yourself, basically make yourself transparent, depending on whether you want people to be looking at the presentation at that moment in time. You can zoom up and block it and then make yourself transparent to kind of draw more focus to what it is that you're presenting. And ultimately, it just shows that in the 21st century, we really now are going to have to start thinking about the tools we're using when we are presenting. And it's becoming a lot more complex than just preparing a good presentation, a good speech. Ultimately, it's all of the extra bits and bobs that we need to think about. And I think this is really such a great tool.
That's so interesting, Chad. I've been watching a couple of videos in the last few weeks talking about people who've been using like DSLR cameras instead of their webcams to try and improve the quality of their Zoom calls or their Skype calls, etc. And this is taking it one step further by going even more crazy and introducing a whole bunch of new innovation to the whole video conferencing thing. I think it's safe to say that video calling is here to stay. I don't think even when the pandemic dies down, we're still going to be on lots and lots of Zoom calls, I feel.
Of course.
And so this is a great example of what you can think about doing in the future to make things even more effective, right? To make your presentation stand out even that much more. And the first thought that I have is that there's so much opportunity here for some sort of app store type ecosystem where you can build some of these components and add it to whatever platform you're using, whether it's Zoom or Skype or Teams or any of this stuff. So this sounds really, really interesting. A sense of like where video calling can go in the future. It's not just going to be about how good is your webcam, how good is your audio. That's going to kind of be the table stakes, the given. But what can you do with this technology to make that even more compelling? I've been in so many conferences and events over the last few months where it doesn't feel that compelling because it's just a talking head, right? It's just someone talking for an hour at a time. And it's very easy to kind of slump in your chair, pull out your phone, start scrolling through your phone. And you're not actually engaged with what the person is saying, which is very different to what you would be in person. And if this technology is able to make things more compelling, to make things more interesting for the person on the other side of the call, then it turns a whole like ball game on its head, and you all of a sudden can do really, really creative things with these video conferencing services. And so this is really interesting. I like this.
Absolutely. I've signed up, so hopefully when they're in beta testing stages. So when they do decide to send me the product to download, I'm definitely going to be letting you know my full thoughts on it, because it really does look slick, and I hope it actually works that way. But it's just that wider discussion of what we're going to be doing with our video conferencing tools in the future. And Barry, that point of upgrading your quality of conferencing in terms of using a DSLR, all of that kind of stuff, that's also really, really interesting. And that's something that we spoke about in that World 1.0, World 2.0 discussion a couple of months ago. And I have actually subsequently bought a device. You, Barry, are looking at a live feed from my camera at the moment, because I've got this device that is basically called the Elgato Camlink 4K. And ultimately, you can plug in a DSLR, and you have essentially your great quality video coming through. And I think something that is bringing this more and more into the mainstream, because previously it's stuck in the world of streamers, it's bringing it more into the mainstream, is when you watch a conferencing call of Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg, those two people, and you ultimately are like, wow, my video conferencing calls never look like that. How do I get it to look like that? And it's important. And if you've ever watched one of those two people on any kind of Skype or Zoom call, ultimately they've got this wonderful camera setup. It looks buttery smooth, and that's how it should be.
Definitely. It kind of feels like the suit of the previous years, right?
Yeah.
Previously, you'd spend your money on a really nice suit. So when you showed up to that interview or that meeting, you looked crisp and sharp, right? You looked your best. And that's how you would spend your money. And now it feels like instead of buying suits, we're sitting in our sweatpants on Zoom calls, but we're going to make the actual footage look absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And that's a really funny look at where the world is going in the future. And I think it's a really, really cool thing. I wonder, Chad, the laptops that are going to come out in the next few years, like how good are their front-facing cameras going to be? And so if those cameras can get to a stage where they are really, really high quality, like iPhone level quality, maybe you won't need all of these workarounds and all of these other things. So I think it's going to change the way the laptops are built in the future. It's going to change the way that Zoom thinks about how they do their thing. Of course, the other side of this coin is that if everyone is now shooting DLSR like footage and sending it over the internet, what does it do for latency and bandwidth and all that sort of thing, right? So the reliability of the calls starts to come into question, especially in places like South Africa where the internet is not always amazing. And so it's a really interesting discussion for the future. So what this is going to look like in a couple of years' time, because Zoom calls are here to stay. And so how are we going to make them better? How are we going to make them more interactive? And how are we going to make those meetings feel as immersive as they can? And when is VR coming, Chad?
Oh, I hope it doesn't come, because I don't need everyone looking at the full 360 degrees of my room that I'm in, Barry. I mean, that feels just crazy. Unless we're talking about a scenario where we can virtually have a table of people and people sitting at their various...
I want to see you sitting right here, Chad. I want across the pond to be sitting having the conversation right here.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. I'm sure we need to keep our eyes peeled for that. But yeah, if we did have a kind of day-long conference, my neck is going to be very sore.
True story. We'll have to hold our judgment on that just for the moment.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on then to our last segment.
Develop and grow.
So, Barry, lockdown has not been kind to me.
Yeah, Chad, it hasn't been kind to me either. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm hiding my belly underneath the shot here to make sure it doesn't get in. Lockdown has been a lot of comfort food.
Yep.
Very little physical exercise, a lot of sitting on the couch, and we had a moment the other day, the two of us, talking about we need to get ourselves in shape.
Yeah, absolutely. I was editing through some footage that I took in the Amalfi Coast, basically teeing up my next YouTube video. And when I was looking through that footage, I was on the beach, shirt was off, and I was like, what on earth is going on? Because it is one of those things where when you look at yourself in the mirror from that front-on perspective, somehow it doesn't look as bad until you look at a photo somebody else has taken of you, or you look at a mirror at a different angle, and then you're kind of like, actually, maybe I need to work on myself a little bit. And so Barry and I have been trying to rack our brains of ways to essentially get rid of all of this unwanted fat that has just basically piled on as a result of lockdown and not walking as much, not being active, not being in a fitness type routine, and of course, obviously, the temptation and the boredom, I suppose, of eating good tasting stuff that hits us with a bit of dopamine. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about Matt D'Avella, the YouTuber who we've spoken about a few times before, who ultimately is your self-improvement, productivity guru, ultimately on YouTube. He's the guy you need to go and watch, and he's actually done a documentary on Netflix, which I still haven't watched, on minimalism. Need to go and check that out. But ultimately, the one rule of his that has stuck with me and has really it's always resonated quite well is this 2-day rule. So what this phenomenon is, Barry, is you can ultimately skip a day of physical activity. You can skip one, but you can't skip two. And I find that so effective, Barry. For some reason, being able to kind of take that rest day, at least once every day if you'd like. Ultimately, when you look at the 7 days in a week, you're still going to be exercising enough. And so I find it such an effective way of doing things where you allow yourself 1 day of rest, but not two.
It's such a great little mnemonic to keep in your brain, and it's very easy to think about and remember, and it's very easy to stick, well, not easy to stick to, let's say, but very simple. And the reason it works is because it talks to that consistency. We all have those moments where we're like, okay, we're going to get our stuff together, Chad. We diet really well for like 2 weeks, we do really, really well, and we have one bad day, And all of a sudden, we're like, oh, stuff this. We had one bad day, therefore I'm just going to throw the rest of the week, throw the rest of the month away. And we go down this very, very slippery slope, and before you know it, we've ruined all of that progress, right?
Yep.
What this rule really does well is that when you have that one bad day, it's okay. Like, you can be kind to yourself. You don't have to beat yourself up. You're like, okay, cool. I had a bad day. I had a day where I wasn't on, or where I ate 18 chocolate chip cookies, or whatever I did. All I have to do is make sure I don't have 2 bad days in a row.
Yep.
And that's a very achievable goal compared to thinking that, oh, I've done 10 perfect days and then one day off, and then, oh, no, I've ruined my streak,
Yep.
and now it's completely dead, right?
Definitely.
And so it's a great little piece of psychology to use against yourself, especially if you're this kind of person like we are, that it really does help us just to kind of keep on the right track. And like
Yep.
you say, we don't have to be working out 2.5 hours a day for 7 days a week to get
Exactly.
results, right? We don't have to do that, and we don't have the time to do that.
Yep.
Whereas this kind of rule just reminds you that consistency over a long enough period, without too many kind of long breaks in between, that's how you get your results. And so, yeah, it's something I need to think about, Chad. It's something I need to implement in the next little bit to make sure I get back on track. And it's one of those very, very achievable type things, which is much, much more realistic than a crash diet or like a 21-day boxing challenge or whatever the story is.
Absolutely. And if you are like us and you have also picked up 1 or 2 extra kgs during lockdown, join us on this journey ultimately of getting ourselves back to our best, whatever that may be, and ultimately, as realistic as that actually is. But let's do it. Let's try and get feeling better and try and implement this rule in getting there, which is neutral to the type of exercise you're doing. You don't have to be doing HIIT workouts. You don't have to be running. You don't have to be standing on a cricket field and running around like Barry loves doing. Just whatever it is that you're doing, do it consistently over time. That'll get us closer to our goal, which I love. Barry, that brings us to an end of another jam-packed episode. And, we've ended this one up in pretty good time.
Damn straight. I've really enjoyed this one. It's been really, really good to chat. You've certainly opened up over the hour, so it's good to see you back after your lack of sleep last night.
Yes.
And for anyone listening, we really appreciate you guys. It's awesome being able to do this every single week. It's one of the highlights of my week.
Yep.
And it's really good to do this.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to close this one off with a challenge to our listeners, actually. A little challenge. Can you step up to this challenge? I wanted to ask if you can think of just one friend who would enjoy listening to the podcast and maybe send us their way. Just one. Give it a little thought, a couple of minutes, and we'll be super, super grateful if you do.
Chad, that's a great challenge. So please send a WhatsApp, a Skype, a TikTok, a Facebook, an Instagram, whatever it is, to a friend that you think really would enjoy this. We really appreciate it. We love to get in front of more people. We're seeing some good news on the YouTube side. So things are growing. But of course, we really would love to grow this audience and this family we're building here at Across the Pond. But for now, that's all from us. We'll see you back here again next week, same time, same place, on another episode of Across the Pond.
Across the pond with Barry and Chad.